You weren't a threat, just a man with a limp and a faded tattoo, standing in the doorway of his own home. That's what the SWAT sergeant decided as he brushed past, barking orders, his armored team flooding the living room in a storm of black vests and adrenaline. They barely glanced at his pregnant wife, Anna, when she pleaded with them to slow down, her hands trembling protectively over her belly. He stood rooted by the armchair, jaw clenched, the lines on his face deepened by years of worry and war, watching as strangers trampled the rug he and Anna had chosen together. The badge on his chest, retired, battered, and ignored, might as well have been invisible. To the SWAT team, he was just another old vet, a relic with nothing left to offer. But they had no idea what lay beneath the surface, or how quickly everything would change once the call went out. And when the dust settled and the front door finally swung open again, the world would see him, truly see him, for the first time in years. If you agree that respect isn't measured by the uniform you wear, but by the sacrifices you've made and the courage you show when no one's watching, like and subscribe, because this story is for everyone who's ever been underestimated. That morning had started quietly, with sunlight slanting through the kitchen window as he brewed Anna's favorite tea and double-checked the locks, a habit he'd never shaken. They sat together, talking about baby names and nursery colors, the world outside momentarily forgotten. Then came the knock, sharp, impatient, a warning of the storm about to break. Before he could reach the door, it burst open. Search warrant. Down. Down. Boots thundered through the hallway, and he barely managed to shield Anna as she was jostled aside, her cry swallowed by the chaos. The sergeant, a thick-set man with a buzz cut and a sneer, waved him off. Stay put, Grandpa. We're not here for you. He tried to explain, voice steady but urgent, that there must be some mistake, but the sergeant turned away, barking into his radio, clear the rooms. Move. He watched as they swept through his home, opening drawers, shoving aside family photos, ignoring Anna's protests. She clung to him, tears streaking her face, and he felt that old, cold clarity settle in his chest, a familiar sensation from another life, one that came just before everything changed. He tried again. My wife is pregnant. Please, let me. But the sergeant cut him off. If you want to help, sit down and shut up. They never asked his name, never noticed the framed photo of him in uniform, arm around his squad, or the medals gathering dust on the mantle. To them, he was just another obstacle. He saw the way they looked at him, pity mixed with contempt, as if he were a burden, not worth a second thought. Anna squeezed his hand, whispering, it's okay, but he saw the fear in her eyes. He'd seen that fear before, in places far from home, and he'd promised himself he'd never let it into this house. The search dragged on. The SWAT team tore through closets, flipping mattresses, tossing aside his old duffel bag without a glance. The sergeant found Anna's ultrasound photo and sneered, hope the kid's tougher than you. Rage rose in his chest, but he forced himself to stay still. He knew how quickly a wrong move could turn fatal. So he waited, silent, watching every detail, every face, memorizing names and badge numbers. Outside, neighbors gathered, drawn by the flashing lights and shouting. Some filmed on their phones, whispering about the old vet's house. He saw the way they looked at him, too, some with sympathy, most with indifference. No one stepped forward. No one spoke up. He wondered if they remembered the stories Anna used to tell at block parties about his service, his medals, the time he'd pulled a kid from a burning car on this very street. Maybe they did. Maybe it didn't matter. When the SWAT team finally finished, the sergeant tossed a crumpled search warrant onto the coffee table. Wrong address, he muttered, not even meeting his eyes. Our bad. Then he was gone, Boots stomping out the door, his team trailing behind, leaving the home in shambles. Anna sobbed quietly, clutching her stomach, and he gathered her close, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. As the last squad car pulled away, he reached for his phone, not to call the police, not to file a complaint, but to dial a number he hadn't used in years. The number he'd memorized in a different life, the one he'd sworn he'd never need again. His hand shook as he pressed the buttons, but his voice was steady when a familiar voice answered. This is Shepard, the voice said, calm and clipped. Is it time? He looked at Anna, at the wreckage of their home, and nodded. It's time. He hung up and turned to Anna. Help is coming, he said, and for the first time that morning, hope flickered in her eyes. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet again, the crowd dispersing, the street empty except for the echo of sirens in the distance. He sat on the front steps, Anna beside him, and waited. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the lawn. He thought about the medals in his closet, the friends he'd lost, the promises he'd made. He thought about the way the sergeant had looked at him, like he was nothing. And he promised himself, right then, that he'd show him, and everyone else, just how wrong they were. Because he wasn't just a tired man with a limp. He was a soldier. He was a protector. And when his unit arrived, when the men and women he'd led through fire and darkness stood beside him once more, the world would remember his name. But for now, he waited, silent and steady, the way he always had. Because sometimes, the hardest battles are fought at home, and sometimes, the greatest victories begin with a single, quiet stand. By the next morning, the neighborhood was still, but tension simmered beneath the surface. Marcus sat quietly beside Anna, who was still shaken by the previous day's chaos. Their home, once a sanctuary, felt violated, drawers left open, family photos askew, the air heavy with the memory of shouted orders and disregard. But Marcus's resolve was only sharpened. He made a single phone call, his voice calm and measured, using a number he hadn't dialed in years. If you believe that the bonds forged in service never truly break, and that loyalty means standing up when it matters most, like and subscribe, because what happens next will restore your faith in brotherhood. It started with a single black SUV gliding to a stop outside Marcus's house. Sarah Reeves, his old second-in-command, now a senior federal agent, stepped out, her presence commanding and quietly fierce. She greeted Marcus with a nod, her eyes scanning the damage. "You said it was time," she said simply. Marcus nodded, and within the hour, more vehicles arrived. One by one, members of his former unit gathered on the lawn, decorated officers, federal agents, and specialists, all answering Marcus's silent call. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, murmuring in disbelief as the quiet old veteran was suddenly surrounded by some of the most respected professionals in the country. Anna watched in awe as Marcus, usually so reserved, took charge, his voice steady, his instructions clear. The group reviewed the SWAT footage, compiled evidence, and coordinated their response with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. By midday, the SWAT team's superiors were summoned to a meeting at the precinct. They entered expecting routine complaints, but instead found themselves facing Marcus's former team, now holding positions of influence across law enforcement and federal agencies. Calmly, they presented evidence, body cam footage, procedural violations, and Marcus's own contributions to national tactical protocols. The SWAT sergeant, who had mocked Marcus, was left speechless as the truth unfolded. News of the confrontation spread quickly. The department issued a formal apology to Marcus and Anna, and the SWAT team was placed under review. Anna, drawing on her background as a civil rights attorney, was invited to help retrain the officers on proper conduct and empathy. Back at home, the neighborhood began to change. Neighbors who had once watched in silence now approached, offering apologies and support. Marcus's old unit stayed for dinner, sharing stories and laughter, filling the house with warmth that had been missing for too long. As dusk settled, Marcus looked around at the faces of those who had stood by him in war and peace. He realized that while the world might forget a veteran's sacrifice, true brothers and sisters in arms never would. And for the first time in years, Marcus felt not just respected, but truly seen. The days that followed brought a quiet transformation to Marcus's world. The house, once echoing with the memory of boots and shouts, now filled with the low hum of neighbors' voices, the gentle clatter of repairs, and the soft laughter of Anna as she found comfort in the company of Marcus's old friends. The unit didn't leave after the apology. They stayed, rolling up sleeves, righting furniture, and fixing what the SWAT team had broken. They moved with the same silent precision that had once carried them through hostile cities and midnight jungles. But now their mission was simple: restore peace to Marcus's home. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. The story of what had happened, the mistaken raid, the disrespect, the quiet phone call that brought a dozen federal agents to a quiet street, became the talk of every porch and corner store. People who had once dismissed Marcus as just another aging veteran now saw him in a new light. Some came to apologize for their silence, others to offer help. For the first time in years, Marcus felt the weight of isolation lift, replaced by a cautious sense of belonging. The official investigation moved swiftly. The body cam footage, now public, left little room for excuses. The SWAT team's leadership was suspended, pending a full review. Training protocols were rewritten, and Anna was invited to consult on new guidelines for handling civilians, especially those most vulnerable. Her quiet dignity in the face of public scrutiny became a lesson in strength for the entire city. But Marcus, for all the attention, remained unchanged. He declined interviews, turned down offers to speak at rallies or appear on television. Instead, he spent his days repairing the small damages left behind, replacing a broken lamp here, repainting a scuffed wall there. Sometimes, he would pause, looking at the medals in his closet, the ones he'd never displayed. Now, Anna insisted on framing one for the living room, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. For the battles fought at home, she said, her eyes shining with pride. The most profound change, however, was in the way people treated each other. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves now checked in on Anna, brought meals, and offered rides to doctor's appointments. The local precinct, under new leadership, started a community outreach program, inviting veterans to train officers in de-escalation and empathy. Marcus's unit returned often, not just for him, but to mentor young recruits, sharing stories not of war, but of peacekeeping, patience, and the quiet courage it takes to stand up for what's right. One afternoon, as summer faded into fall, the city held a small ceremony at the park across from Marcus's house. There were no speeches, no fanfare, just a simple plaque mounted on a stone, inscribed with words chosen by Anna. For those who protect, even when unseen. Marcus stood at the edge of the crowd, hands in his pockets, watching as Anna traced the letters with her fingers. Children played nearby, unaware of the history that had unfolded on their street. His old unit stood beside him, not in uniform, but as friends, family forged by fire and time. As the sun set, Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Sarah Reeves, his former second-in-command. "You did good, Shepard," she said quietly. "You reminded them what real service looks like." He shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "We did it together. Like always." That night, as the house settled into silence, Marcus sat by the window, watching Anna sleep. He thought of the battles he'd fought, the friends he'd lost, the promises he'd kept. He thought of the day the SWAT team had stormed his home, and the way his unit had answered his call not with violence, but with unwavering resolve. He realized then that legacy isn't built on medals or headlines. It's built on the lives we touch, the respect we show, and the courage to stand up, even when the world looks away. The next morning, Marcus rose early, as he always had. He walked Anna to the bus stop, hand on her shoulder, eyes scanning the street, not out of fear, but out of habit and love. Neighbors waved, children called his name, and for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt truly seen. And as he watched Anna disappear into the morning light, he knew that the watch never really ends. It just changes hands. Because respect isn't something you demand. It's something you live, every single day. If you believe that the quietest heroes often leave the deepest marks, share this story. And remember, sometimes, the strongest walls are built not of stone, but of loyalty, love, and the courage to stand together, no matter what comes through the door.